This is Hot Science with the week's top news in science, technology, and medicine. I'm Richard Clarke. I'm hosting Hot Science. Welcome.
Hi, Ken Sloan. My wife Cheryl Sloan wants to watch it right now.
Oh, very good. We're glad to see you with us today. And
we just arrived here on Sunday for 3 months, the usual 3 months.
very good. Very good. You arrived here for our cold streak.
Yeah, so we understand.
Where
It's
you?
not as bad as Toronto, Canada, though.
Okay. I can appreciate that. What we think is cold, other people might not.
Exactly.
Yep.
Could always be worse.
Yes. Well, I spent a year on an island just south of the Arctic Circle in the Arctic Ocean, and it was worse there.
Yes.
Okay. So the stories that we're going to be covering this week are the top news story is how CNET, one of the big websites, is quietly publishing entire articles generated by AI. And to keep with the AI theme, the next story is about a company, Do Not Pays. They have a robot lawyer that is gearing up for its first U.S. court case. And also in technology, the E1 World Electric Powerboat series, Everything You Need to Know, the E1 are electric boat racing like F1 for Formula One auto racing. And in the environment, an article that's entitled Dancing Around the Obvious Climate Solution. And we'll see what that is in a bit. And in materials, a riddle solved. Why was Roman concrete so durable? It lasts thousands of years. Our concrete now doesn't last hundreds of years. And in space, the space race expands. Why African nations are looking beyond the Earth. And in biology, the first ever vaccine for honeybees has been approved by the USDA. And the human story for the week is women work harder than men. That's not news to some of us, I think. And this is an anthropological study reveals why. And then finally, in medicine, this biotech startup says that mice live longer after genetic reprogramming. So I'm not sure when genetic reprogramming is going to get lakeside. I'm ready for it if I'm still alive. So to start with our story, CNET, which is a popular technical news outlet, has been employing automation technology, their version of AI, for a new wave of financial explaining articles starting about November of last year. The articles are published under the unassuming appellation of CNET Money Staff, but if you click on it, you find out the actual authorship, quote, this article was generated using automation technology, end quote. And since the program has began, CNET has put out around 73 AI generated articles. It's about one every week. So it's not a lot of them, or excuse me, it's about one every day. So it is a common part of their content now. And they're trying to keep the experiment as low key as possible. Maybe this is because Google's thinks that AI generated content may be designed to manipulate search engine rankings, and this is against the company's policy. And it may be that Google's approach to whether or not they list these within their search engine may be the thing actually that is a make or break point for this kind of technology. Because if Google won't list your articles, then they lose a major bit of their visibility, and it's not useful anymore to the publishers. Anyway, it also turns out the Associated Press has been using AI to write articles since 2015. They use it to automatically write earnings reports. This is really formatted data, though, and it looks like the AP's auto-generated material looks like it's filling in blanks in a predetermined format. So that's a lot easier than what CNET is doing. And CNET's publication looks like it's using something that's much more like OpenAI's GPT-3. And so I think I had this as a top story for this week because it's one story about how these AI text writing systems are now moving into more common use, and we may be seeing them as we read our morning news. You have to look carefully, I guess, to see if it's written by a human or not. Anyway, any thoughts about this, folks?
No, in some ways, this AI is just doing the white collar writing jobs what Gutenberg did to scribes and hand copied books, and what the Industrial Revolution did to local craftsmanship, and what the music recording industry did to local live entertainment, and what word processing did to secretaries. So maybe it's just progress. And adaptable people will learn to use AI the same way they learn to use electronic calculators and typewriters and all these other progressive inventions.
Well, certainly, you're right, Andrew. It's just a tool and a new tool. And, ask us in 20 years what the impact has been. It's easier to know in hindsight than looking ahead.
Yeah, no one laments the disappearance of typewriters, I don't think.
That's right. Well, I remember, wasn't there this U.S. song about the steel driving man?
Yeah.
That was an early case in American history anyway, or American mythology. I don't know. Was John Henry real? Does anyone know? Was
he a miner or was he a track layer?
A track layer.
Yeah, spike pounder.
That's right. Anyway, that's the way the story goes. And the next story I have is another AI story, and it's AI breaking into what used to be called the knowledge worker arena. And now an AI-based legal advisor is set to play the role of lawyer in an actual courtroom case. for the first time, and it'll participate via an earpiece and will coach the courtroom defendant on what to say to get out of paying the fines and consequences of a speeding ticket. This will go to trial sometime in February in California, and it's very likely that what they're doing is in violation of courtroom laws. In many countries and jurisdictions, internet-connected devices are banned from courts, and this company is using a loophole that is based on hearing accessibility standards in this particular court, which allows them to use Apple AirPods. And so they're going to broadcast through the Apple AirPods everything the defendant should say. And when asked if the court will be aware of the AI assistance during the hearing, the company's president responded, "Definitely not." So they're doing it and hiding it. He's not too concerned about legal repercussions because at the end of the day, it's just a traffic ticket. And he says the law doesn't have explicit provisions barring AI legal assistance. Plus, it's an experiment, and he's got a new company, and we like to take risks. And so in the cases that are currently going to trial, there are a couple of them, do not pay plans to take responsibility and pay any fines that are received, and they are compensating the two defendants for being test subjects for their use of the technology. Now, the company was started in 2015 as a chatbot that was focused on helping people contest parking tickets. And it was fairly successful in New York and London. They've successfully contested 160,000 parking tickets, and they say worldwide it has handled 2 million cases. In 2015, with the release of ChatGPT, it converted from its chatbot to ChatGPT technology. And more recently, the company Do Not Pay has gotten attention for its corporate negotiation tactics. They've demonstrated, for example, knocking $10 off a monthly internet bill using the ChatGPT powered bot. They also have used an AI and synthesized voice to reverse $16 worth of banking fees. And their goal is to have AI eventually supplant some lawyers entirely. And already they have tools that can produce written communication or scripts for people trying to avoid or minimize fines and healthcare costs and subscription costs, things like that. For now, what they're doing in court is just a proof of concept. There is something they also have offered that is not covered in this article, is they have offered $100,000 for the first lawyer to take a case to the Supreme Court and just use in the Supreme Court for their verbal argument the scripts that's piped into them through their AirPods. So I think that is certainly it's an attention-raising offer. And, here they say, this is a quote from the company, we help consumers fight corporations and beat bureaucracy, getting out of parking tickets and refunds from big companies like airlines. Our vision at Do Not Pay is to make the law free. So how about that? You're AI lawyer.
Well, you know, we're already dealing with AI robots when we click and buy on the internet, and when we try to return something on the internet, it's all responses from AI computers.
Sure.
But there's a tremendous backlog in the courts for the lack of prosecutors. And if they could successfully shift a lot of the work to AI, it could reduce the backlogs in the courts.
Yes.
And then before you know it, we'll have AI prosecutors and AI defenders and AI judges, and they can do the whole works.
That's right. We just need AI defendants and we're covered.
Yeah.
Now,
And so,
I hope when they do that, I hope they make a rule that the same company can't provide all three services.
yeah. Well, and there's a huge backlog in the medical test world,
Right.
examining mammograms and radiography stuff and MRIs and all that. And
Right.
when that can be handled by AI, it will make all of this more efficient and more useful. But it'll be just like there'll be different AIs, and just like some people want to hire the best lawyer, you'll want to hire the best AI to defend your case.
To handle your kind of case, and you'd probably need a different AI lawyer for a murder case than you'd want for a traffic ticket.
Yeah.
And certainly with the case of medical diagnosticians and that kind of work, they've been already testing AI for interpreting x-rays, and AIs do about as well as the average trained human.
In a fraction of the time.
Yes, absolutely. So they can work the backlog down a lot faster. So anyway, it's interesting. The tools are coming.
Well, what it really means is in 20 years, everyone will have their own personal AI secretary to handle all manner of trivial interactions with the bureaucracy. They'll order
Between your personal AI and the bureaucracy AI. And we'll count on our personal ones being more advanced than the bureaucracy ones, because bureaucracy technology moves slower than personal technology. So my AI is better than yours. That's what we'll hope. Okay, the next thing I want to show you is something that I thought was exciting. Let me get the things up here. And this is the E1 electric power boat series. And there are boat designers that have now designed a new electric speedboat called the Race Bird. And this is about the sleekest thing that I've ever seen. And this Race Bird is going to be the star of a new E1 World Electric Power Boat series, which is supposed to start next year. I'll just keep flashing these pictures at you. And this is a carbon fiber boat. They've designed it and built some models. They haven't done a real live in water test yet, but that's coming soon. They say it'll have a speed of about 50 knots. Excuse me, that's not a speedboat anymore. It'll have a speed of about 50 knots and powered by an electric outboard motor, and it uses hydrofoils to lift it up out of the water, so it has very little drag. And if they think you'll have better control of this hydrofoil electric boat than you would of a typical speed racer, so they're going to be able to race with the boats closer together, and they think they'll be able to race close to shore, like in Monaco, in the bay in Monaco, so people can watch it from the shore and actually see the races. Right now, the speedboat races are pretty much far out at water, so they're not a very good spectator event unless you have your own yacht. My yacht's in the harbor for repair, I guess, so I want these. And in this series, they plan to have 12 teams, which they don't have yet, which they ought to have if they're planning to race this year. And they plan a racing venue all around the world. So far, Monaco is the only one that is confirmed. They're talking to about 70 other potential host cities, and they think that they will have their first race in the Saudi Arabia city of Jeddah, off the coast, of course, in the water. And this is going to be a kind of new, exciting event. And this is electric boats are still in their infancy. And what the people who are developing this boat hope to see happen is they will make versions of this same boat that will be personal speedboats, and they plan to introduce the personal speedboat by offering them basically to rent at these big events that they're having, so people will be able to not only watch the boats but get in one and go speed around, and if they don't kill themselves, they'll come back and tell how much fun it was. And they plan also, they think this will help them sell the boats. And so this is a company that is entering the electric boats in the same way at the top of a competitive arena like F1 racing for cars, trying to promote the whole idea and trying to put together an international racing series to get these things in the water. And to me, they sure look cool. I don't know how fast they'll be. I bet they're fast, but they sure look cool. And the people that are behind this were also involved in the electric Formula One racing, and they say that if you look at the future of all of these kind of motor racing, since the transportation is moving from gas to electric, then the racers should do that too. And I tend to agree with them.
Yeah, Sea-Doo already make an electric hydrofoil surfboard that
Wow.
you stand on, and it will actually come out of the water and run on the hydrofoil.
And it'll give people like me who don't yet have good balance on something like that further to fall into the water.
I guess so.
That's good. Anyway, it's cool stuff. And us stupid men, right? We like these speed things, so please forgive us. Okay, the next one is dancing around the obvious climate solution. And they say there's a lot of dancing around a carbon tax is the obvious solution to climate change. What is lacking is the confidence to go all in. If we had the confidence, they say, the steps would be obvious. Combine a reduction in the payroll tax and tax carbon dioxide instead. They think we could eliminate the payroll tax. And the idea is getting some play in the US political system. Mitt Romney says that a border-adjusted carbon tax is the most powerful way to reduce worldwide emissions. And the problem with just a carbon tax is that it raises the price of nearly everything that we buy. And so that's terrible politics and not good policy. But if we combine the carbon tax with a cut in payroll taxes, then it comes out where it could be to the advantage of the usual taxpayer in the USA. And it turns out that if the US doesn't do something soon in Europe, it looks like they're going to enact a carbon border adjustment mechanism, and they already are planning it enough that they have their acronym, a CBAM. And American companies under this who are selling commodities into Europe are going to have to pay a carbon tax when their products get into Europe. And it turns out the way these taxes are being planned, if you paid the tax in America before you exported it over to Europe, you wouldn't have an additional European carbon tax. And so the revenues from the carbon tax would go to America, not to Europe. So I think that actually is a pretty strong argument for enacting the tax now. So the monies go to America, not into Europe. The end price for the consumers are going to be the same either way. If there's a tax on all these items, it means it increases the cost for the manufacturer, and they're not going to eat that cost themselves. They're going to make us pay more. And so because of this, besides Romney, there are other Republican senators like Senator Kevin Cramer, who is a Republican from North Dakota, who is also stepping forward. And so there looks like there is interest in this carbon import tax carbon tax that is starting to form in Congress and even in the Republican side of Congress. So it might end up being something that happens. And if this happens, then if the carbon content affects the price of all these products around the world, then the idea is that manufacturers will figure out how to reduce the carbon content in their products, and it will benefit the world by reducing the carbon in our environment. It's still, I think, a big political task, because to do it, it needs to do something that's very hard to do in America, which is to get the Republicans and Democrats working together. It might be, if that's required, that it'll never happen. Anyway, what do you guys think?
The problem with this is it will increase the cost of energy and products for poor people. And poor people don't pay much payroll tax, so they won't get the offset. They'll just get a lower standard of living.
Right. Certainly, that's one of the things. And there was a version of this that did not include the reduction in the payroll taxes that was pushed by the Democrats in 1996. And it's believed that that's why the Democratic candidate lost to Bush in 2000. Is people don't like the idea of having their cost of living go up.
The other thing it will do is it will encourage greater energy efficiency and less energy waste. And
Yes.
so that's probably a good thing.
Right. That's, I think, the reason why they're trying to do it is. And anyway, I wish them luck, because I feel like what they're trying to do is one of the right things to do, and have there be a cost to the carbon in your product, I know will mean that there's less carbon in the product. Somehow they'll figure it out. Having been in companies trying to make money, I realize that they take it seriously. That's their job. Anyway, now a material story, and this is about one of the things that really has been a mystery for a very long time. The Romans were great at engineering, and they were able to construct vast networks of roads and aqueducts and ports and buildings, and the remains have lasted for 2,000 years, and in fact, in the Pantheon in Rome, it has the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome ceiling, and it was built in 128 and is still intact. Modern concrete structures have crumbled after a few decades. And so researchers have spent decades trying to figure out what is the secret of the Roman concrete. And now a team of investigators from MIT, Harvard, and laboratories in Italy and Switzerland have made progress, and they have discovered ancient concrete manufacturing strategies that end up creating several self-healing functionalities. For many years, researchers have assumed that the key to the Roman concrete's durability was based on a kind of volcanic ash that was from a volcano in the Bay of Naples. And this kind of ash was even shipped around the Roman Empire to be used everywhere for the concrete in construction. So that's pretty good evidence that it was important. And when they looked more closely at this Roman concrete, they've noticed that they contain small, distinctive, millimeter scale, bright white mineral. And these white chunks they referred to as lime clasts, and they originate from lime, and they're not found in modern concrete formulations. And they previously disregarded these lime casts as evidence of sloppy mixing practices or pure quality control. And a new study suggests that these lime clasts gave the concrete previously unrecognized self-healing capacity. And what they used was not lime, but a more reactive form known as quicklime. And they have determined that these white things were in fact made out of various forms of calcium carbonate that had been formed at high temperatures. And another part of the process that they believe was essential is what they call hot mixing, where the ingredients to make the concrete are mixed under a high heat. And when you do this hot processing, it allows chemistries that are not possible if you only use low temperature slaked lime, and it produces compounds that would not otherwise form. And also, this increased temperature significantly reduces the curing and setting times, since all of its reactions are accelerated, and it allows for faster construction, which sounds very beneficial. And during this hot mixing process, the lime casts develop a brittle nanoparticulate architecture, and it creates an easily fractured and reactive calcium source, which, when cracks form, they provide self-healing. As soon as the tiny cracks start to form within the concrete, they travel through the lime casts, and then when the lime casts get wet, they create a calcium saturated solution, which recrystallizes as calcium carbonate and fills the cracks. So this automatically heals cracks in Roman concrete before they spread. And they tested their ideas making standard concrete and making their equivalent of Roman concrete, and deliberately cracked them, and they found the Roman concrete healed within a couple of weeks, while the conventional concrete, of course, didn't do anything. And now that they have figured this out, they're trying to figure out how to commercialize this modified cement material, making concrete that lasts longer will have a big benefit for the concrete structures, since they will also last longer. And they think, interestingly, that it could improve the durability of 3D printed concrete structures, which is, I think, interesting, since they're talking about using that for things like making housing and stuff like this. So maybe we figured out the Roman secret, and maybe we could reproduce it today.
Another factor may be that when the Romans made their cement, they calcined the lime at lower temperatures. Modern cement is made at about 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit in a lime kiln, where they put the calcium carbonate in one end and drive off the CO2.
Right.
The Romans weren't able to get those high temperatures. They only got about 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit, and that may have left some of the calcium carbonate uncalcined and leave these lime clasts that they talk about in the cement that gave it the self-healing properties. But it was probably just an unintended consequence from the Romans. They weren't looking for something to last 2,000 years. They were just looking for something that would last.
Right.
Using the materials they had available and the technology they had available.
Right. And certainly if the process made cement that set faster, then that's a real benefit in using it for construction.
Yeah, ordinary cement actually heats when it hydrates. And like when they were building the Hoover Dam, they had to install cooling coils in the concrete to
Wow.
take away the heat to avoid problems with overheating the
Uh-huh.
concrete as it cured.
Anyway, it's interesting, and they solved a riddle that is 2,000 years old. So I think it's good work by those scientists. And now the next one is a space story about why African nations are looking beyond the Earth. Africa has slowly gone into space. Their first mission was in Egypt, Nilesat 101, which launched in 1998, and it was a communication satellite and provided multimedia services, internet services to over 5 million homes. And since then, over 40 satellites have been put up by African countries, 20 in the last 5 years. And in addition, now the first satellite to be entirely developed in Africa was launched by South African Cape Peninsula University in January of last year. So they're launching their own satellites. And African nations have been using these satellites to get a better view of continental problems, ranging from climate issues to terrorism. For example, Nigerian satellites help the government track the movements of Boko Haram in the northeastern parts of the country. And in Ghana, the SAT-4 farming program is used to help thousands of small-scale cocoa farmers negotiate climate conditions using satellite imagery. And now there are space startups such as South Africa's Astrophica, who are working to expand satellite data collection to gather agricultural data and improve agricultural technology. This is key in Africa because the African economies are heavily dependent upon agriculture. And so anything you can do to improve the productivity of that sector is a big win for them. And the growth of the African satellite industry demonstrates the African government's desire to become less dependent on outside technology, but still collaboration remains the normal process. These satellite launches that we're talking about are done by rockets from other countries. These launches last year were done by SpaceX. And so one part of this story is how these companies providing launch services are also bringing programs from other countries who don't have those kind of launch capabilities and bringing them into space. I think, for example, there are Japanese missions, I believe, to the moon that are still done, starting with SpaceX, Elon Musk's SpaceX. So these kind of launch services are creating opportunities for other countries to start to get into space. And so now, between now and 2025, which is not far from now, 2 years out, African nations are planned to launch over 100 new satellites. So they're getting into it in a pretty big way. They got started late, but they have found that these satellites can provide them with real benefits and are investing in the technology. So we used to be the only ones. That we're not by any means the only ones in the game now. And to me, this is one of the things that really shows that this space business is becoming a standard part of the needed infrastructure for the world. And right now, the stuff we're talking about in Africa are really mainly satellites that are providing communication help and monitoring, but they're already useful enough for the countries in Africa where they're paying the millions of dollars to develop them and get them in our orbit. And now for the human story. This is one I told you about before. Women work harder than men, and they've made an anthropological study that reveals why. For most people around the world, physical work takes up a great amount of time and energy every day. Those most people include none of us, of course. And what determines whether it's men or women who are working harder in households? So these anthropologists carried out a study of farming, and herding groups in the Tibetan borderlands. And they used it to try to shed light on the gender division of works across many different societies. The majority of adults around the world are married, but there is unequal bargaining power in many households, and this unequal power can lead to unequal work. And the anthropologists were going to test their hypothesis, which was that leaving the area where you were born after you're married to live with your spouse's family may contribute to higher levels of workload. In such marriages, the new person typically is not related to and doesn't share any history with anyone in their new household. And without blood relatives about them, they are at a disadvantage. In places like India, one of the things that I saw happening is most of the households were multi-generation family households with parents and grandparents and kids living in a household. And when marriages happen, usually the new wife left her family and moved into the new household. And of the adults in the new household, the new wife was the low person on the totem pole, and household work flows downhill, it turns out. And so for years, this new woman in the household would be the hardest worker until somebody else married and there was another newer member of the household, and they waited for the day when they were the oldest woman in the household and ran everything. So that's what I saw when I was actually there. So anyway, the most common form of marriage around the world is where women are the ones that leave their native home, while men stay with their family. This is known as patrolocality. And there are other forms. There is neo-locality, where both sexes disperse into a new location. That's a common practice. Then there is matrilocality, where they all move into the woman's house. That shows up, but it's rare. And then there is duolocality, where neither sex leaves home and husband and wife live apart. That is very rare. And the thing about the area that they studied in these Tibetan borderlands is it's ethnically diverse, and all four of those different dispersal patterns can be found in different groups. So it was a great place for them to test, because all the different patterns of marriage location are found there. And so they interviewed about 500 people about their dispersal status after marriage, and invited them to wear an activity tracker like a Fitbit. And they found out some interesting things. The first thing they found out, surprise, surprise, is that women worked harder than the men and contributed most of the fruits of their labor to the household. Women, on average, walked about 12,000 steps a day. The men walked about 9,000 steps a day, and the men spent more time in leisure or social activities. Again, what I saw in the villages and the men is there would be some in India, is there would be typically some square or feature in the center of the town, and often there would be groups of men sitting there talking to each other while the women were still working. So that's also something that I saw. And what they found, though, is that the individuals, whether they were male or female, who live away from their kin when they're married, have higher workloads than those who stayed at their native home. And so if you are female and move away from your home at marriage, you suffer not only in terms of missing your own family, but in terms of doing more work. Now, they say these results help them to understand why it's more common for women to move from their household than men, because when dispersal is very bad for men because they have to work more. It's as simple as that. So it turns out, if you look at that, that helps them explain, they say, why around the world, more usually it's the woman who moves away from her family rather than the men. Because men, though they talk tough, don't want to work as much. And so now you have scientific evidence that supports what you probably observed in your own life. Any comment?
Well, what they're doing is equating steps taken to work done.
Uh-huh.
And that's not necessarily correct. And normally in these situations, the women consume less calories than the men. And you would think that if they were doing more work, they would need to consume more calories.
But they also have smaller body size, and so how they evaluate calories is calorie use is kind of calorie consumption per kilogram of weight. And so a woman who has 20% less body weight is going to use 20% fewer calories to do the same amount of work. So I think you have to put that in the situation. I also know, as I say, from my own observations of life in India, I saw the difference between the workload of the women and the men. And since I lived outside of the city, one of the things I was able to see was things like rice fields and stuff like that for the agricultural practices went on. The men in that place, the men handled the plowing of the field and getting it ready for the planting, and the women handled the planting, the tending, and the harvesting. And so it was common during those parts of the year to see 10 or 20 women out in the rice fields with their saris hiked up with their feet in the water, and there would be one man sitting on the edge of the field. They said he was watching for snakes.
Well, and when they do these studies of Stone Age people, the gatherers contribute more calories to the group than the hunters do. So that's sort of, it reinforces what you're saying. But the men are typically more involved in violent clashes with strangers and neighbors and animals. So,
well, also they're more involved in doing things that require more physical strength. That's why the men were behind the bullock plowing the field, because that takes strength and upper body strength to be able to control the plow. But again, what I saw typically in the center of every village were a bunch of men sitting around in the shade talking to each other. And the women would be busy whenever I saw them. Anyway, so I'm happy. I feel satisfied with that they found something that is a useful explanation, and it's something because I'm aware of because of some anthropology background I have. Anyway, and now what they did say is that if you look at modern situations where both people move away from home, like you have when people are moving to the city, then the work distribution becomes much more equal between the men and the women. Okay, continuing now, our animal story this week is about the first ever vaccine for honeybees. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture has approved the first ever vaccine for honeybees to prevent American foul brood disease, which is a fatal bacteria disease that can destroy honeybee colonies. This is the first licensed honeybee product, and the disease is aimed at American foul brood disease is one of the most widespread and most destructive of the honeybee brood diseases. And before this, the customary treatment for the disease was to incinerate the bees and infected hives in addition to antibiotic treatments. And, that's not very good for that beehive to have to be burnt up. And so this is a new approach that is a real step forward for beekeepers, and who can now prevent an infection in the hives and avoid these terrible treatments and focus their energy on doing other things to keep the bees healthy. Now, the global population and changing climates are increasing the importance of honeybee pollination to secure our food supply. So doing things that help the honeybees are good for helping all of us. And it turns out the honeybee vaccine, the way they deliver it is they mix it into what they call queen feed, which the workers' bees consume, and then they incorporate this into the royal jelly, which they produce, which are used to feed it to the queen. And once the queen has consumed the vaccine-laden royal jelly, fragments of the vaccine are deposited in her ovaries, and after that, the queen's larvae will be born with immunity to the disease. And so this revolutionary honeybee vaccine has been approved by the Department of Agriculture, and will be available this year for purchase in the USA. And maybe this will help our declining bee population. And it's real interesting to me now that our vaccine technology is extending to honeybees.
Yeah, the amazing bit is that they can feed the vaccine to the queen and it's passed on to the children and gives them the immunity. How does
Yes.
that work? Yeah.
Right. They say they feed it to the queen, and the vaccine gets in the ovaries. And then after that, all of her eggs produce larvae that have the immunity. So that's pretty clever. You know, again, these scientists really continue to impress me. There's some clever folks out there, you know, and you wonder who figured that out. Or at least I wonder things like that occasionally. Anyway, so the last story we have today is how maybe we can live longer. And a small biotech company claims to have used a technology called reprogramming to rejuvenate old mice and extend their lives. I'm not a mice, but I'm old, so I'm interested in this. And the results suggest that one day older people could have their biological clocks turned back with an injection, literally becoming younger. And so this life extension claim in rodents has not been peer reviewed yet, so it's still an early finding. And the reprogramming technique involves resetting cells to a younger state. And these ideas have been generating hundreds of millions of dollars in investments, because the investors know whoever comes up with an anti-aging approach that is practical is going to make billions of dollars. So they're willing to invest billions of dollars. And the approach has previously been shown to work on single cells, and they're now trying to see if it works with living animals. And in this test they did with mice, what they did is they used gene therapy, essentially infecting the mice with a virus that causes a genetic change, and it reprograms 3 genes into the bodies of mice, and the mice that they injected were the equivalent of human 77-year-olds. So I'm 79, and so it was like I could get my injection. And after the treatment in these old mice, their remaining lifespan was doubled. So I figure the way I'm going, I'll probably last another 10 years. And if I could last another 20 years of healthy aging, I would like that, you know? So it's interesting to me. Overall, though, since it's applied at the end, late in life, the lifespan of these treated mice were only about 7% longer. But they say the research provides a demonstration of age reversal in an animal. And still, this whole body rejuvenation using gene therapy remains poorly understood, and there are huge risks. One of the risks that I had read about and that they talk about in this article is this genetic reprogramming. This is basically turning back the epigenetic clock. The epigenetic clock are changes that happen in your DNA as you age. So there are little markers that happen as you age, and that changes how the gene expresses, how the gene actually is manifest in your body. And they found in the testing, if they rolled them all the way back, then while it made many of them younger, it also made many other of them develop cancers. And so a anti-aging treatment that causes you to have cancer is not going to be very popular. So they have been working on rolling back the epigenetic clock part of the way. And I believe that's what you're saying here. They talk in the article, in fact, about the risk of cancer through this genetic reprogramming. But again, this is a hot area for research and investment. And one company, Altos Labs, says it's raised over $3 billion. So it's working on those genetic reprogramming. And now the treated mice did survive noticeably longer, and they also scored better on measures of general health. So it looks like it not only extended their life, but extended their quality of life as well, which is important, because as I say, I'm happy to live another 20 years as long as I feel good, And so that's an important detail. There's a U.S. government program that tests drugs for their longevity, and they found several compounds, including a drug, rapamycin, that can prolong mouse lives by 5 to 15%. This treatment extended the mouse life by 7%. The problem is with these other drugs is the mice had to take it for long periods before it has any effect. And this just takes one injection, and then, wow, you're ready to live longer. So it's much more practical. And there now are several companies that are now pressing forward with their plans for reprogramming drugs. But these early ones, they are trying to target particular organs instead of trying to reprogram the whole body like they did with the mouse. There's one company that hopes to inject reprogramming factors into people's skin to fight wrinkles. And I know people who would buy that, and restart hair growth. I know people who would buy that too. So, those are targeted applications that will be money makers. Another one is working to test whether reprogramming cells in the eye can treat blindness. And I think that would be a profound discovery if that turns out to be the case. So this, just pay attention to this genetic reprogramming. You may also find articles under the name of epigenetics that talk about the same thing. And this is one of the most promising areas that they're finding in the anti-aging research. As I have said, I just hope they find it before it's too late for me, you know?
Yeah, maybe this is the answer to the demographic aging of the population. We'll just give everybody a shot and they'll be younger.
Well, if that's going to be the solution, then I expect we'll see it used first in China, because China is their population now is starting to decline and they're running out of workers.
Well, the interesting thing too will be right now, everything we have was unimaginable 100 years ago. And 100 years from now, they'll have stuff that we just cannot imagine today.
Right. Right, except that the rate of change, it'll be 30 years, not 100 years before we can't imagine it anymore. But anyway, that's the period that we're living in, and that's one of the reasons why I think these hot science sessions are real interesting, because there is so much good work going on, and every week I think I report on discoveries that are groundbreaking discoveries, and it's week after week after week.
Yeah, and even if just 1% of them come to fruition, that's significant.
That's a lot of them. Yes. Yes. Anyway, thank you for joining me today. And
Thank you.
We'll see you next week. And I really appreciate your joining us today too. So adios.